Good evening, I'm Sav Jones, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is Ojibwe Mohawk writer and actor Katarina Ziervogel. She's a registered member of Saugeen Anishinaabe Nation in Manitoba and a graduate of Toronto Metropolitan University's media production program. Katarina, who is deaf, got her breakout role playing Taloa, the mother of the title character in the Marvel miniseries Echo. The show is known for featuring deaf characters who are played by deaf actors. 27 years young and yet still a powerhouse of talent, Katarina also premiered her first co-written feature film, Finality of Dusk, last year. She hopes to use her skills to create more opportunities for deaf and Indigenous creatives. Thanks so much for being with me here today, Katarina. I've been so looking forward to talking with you.
Absolutely, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting.
Absolutely. You know, you're still in the dawn of your career, but have already accomplished so much. I was actually surprised to find out that even in your earlier days, you were in an episode of an APTN show called Taken, which focuses on true stories about missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. I think you were about 20 years old at the time. Back then, did you realize that you were laying the foundation for the success that you have now?
I know when I was working on that foundation, I was really thinking about how it could impact, giving back to the community, right? Giving a voice to those voices that weren't being heard. And so not only the Indigenous, but also deaf communities. And that really was a strong foundation for my career. I don't think I had thought that, but it was.
Absolutely. Getting that part in Echo would be a big deal for anybody. The Marvel franchise is a household name. But you've mentioned before that the experience was great because the set was made accessible for you as a deaf actor. How do you think the series might change the landscape for accessibility measures on film sets going forward? Do you have new expectations for their future projects?
I think it's going to be very impactful, right? Because it's increasing the opportunities for deaf, disabled actors, and just having those characters in mainstream media. Because for a long time, those pieces were never included. We weren't hired. Deaf people were kind of pushed aside. Disabled characters were not really included until now, and finally they're coming out into the mainstream, right? Where the characters are being highlighted. And when Marvel kind of created that accessibility, or Paramount did, Marvel did, they were creating that not only for deaf and disabled actors, but just having those characters be a highlight, right? And showing that there's not an excuse to not include that accessibility, and it can be done, and that there aren't excuses.
Absolutely. In the past, you've said that you're part of two cultures, Indigenous culture and deaf culture. How is it connecting with your Indigenous culture as a deaf person and your deaf culture as an Indigenous person?
I think that they happen really kind of simultaneously, right? In the past, deaf people weren't really allowed to use their sign languages. They were taken from their families, going to other schools as well. And that's a similar experience to Indigenous culture, where, the Indigenous groups were not allowed to kind of be with each other as well. And so there's a lot of similarities in there. And just seeing how that impact of language deprivation, and you see that in between both of those cultures. And so when I think about that and having both of those cultures within myself, I really start wondering, how that impacted my identity. What does that mean to me as a person having both of those cultures, and how to kind of fit into both of those communities? In what way there were a lot of similarities, but also there are differences too. And so it had that impact on me. And when I, just think about that, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but yeah.
How do you find the accessibility to your culture as an Indigenous person is made available to you for someone who's deaf?
wouldn't say it's quite there yet. I do think it's coming, right? Because things are starting to be recognized, you know, even from different provincial and federal levels, right? So having input and knowing that there's a lot of language deprivation, you know, and having people taken from their families, especially if you think back to the 60s scoop. So when I consider where it was, I'm hoping that as time goes on, you know, these issues of accessibility will come to the forefront, right? Where it can kind of be, we give it a chance to kind of reconnect with the cultures, right? Nowadays, what we're seeing out there is there's so many Indigenous youth, not only youth, I mean, of all ages, right? Where people are finally feeling like they're able to connect with their culture and know where they have come from. And when you think about the deaf of hard of hearing communities, the hope is that it's starting to open the conversation and start that conversation so that the accessibility is there, so they can access that sort of culture, the traditions, and the language. So it's getting there.
Well, and that makes me wonder, like, how can allies make cultural spaces like powwows or ceremony more accessible for people who are deaf? Like, I assume the vibrations from, you know, the drums and the dancing are just as invigorating for you as they are for me.
Absolutely. I've always felt that way. You always have that sense of, you know, inspiration and that feeling, and having the drum really kind of like a heartbeat, right? And you feel that in your soul and in your body. So having collaboration in that way, like I've always felt like the drum beat is kind of like a heartbeat anytime I've attended a powwow. In my family, we have had some struggle to reconnect. My mother was a part of the 60s, she's a 60s scoop survivor. And so I did attend as a child, but really my first memory of going to a powwow was only at the age of 12. And so since then, I've had a few opportunities, and more opportunities are occurring. And I'm hoping that that will continue, right, with the access to it as well. What that would look like, I don't know what shape that would take, but as a deaf and hard of hearing culture, I think we need to kind of get together and figure out what are the needs that we have from the events. Where are the barriers, right? And how we can make those spaces accessible to us. But coming from people who have had that experience in culture, and just thinking about how that takes shape in different ceremonies and different forms.
I know that you're working on a documentary right now about Indigenous sign languages. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I've actually been working on the documentary for a couple of years now. I was still in the research process, really focusing on Indigenous sign languages and the history behind that and how it's come to be. One thing that's always been very fascinating, it's really been fascinating for me because, you know, our ancestors, you know, whether they were deaf or not, often used sign languages or signs. You know, pre-colonialism and how once that happened, post, is the language really started to fade, right? But it was always there in the ancestral languages, and I think it was a very inclusive and accessible environment, something that we weren't really aware, because it's a huge oral tradition, but I think that oral tradition also was inclusive of signs. And so I'm trying to focus on that piece in the documentary.
That's interesting to me, because I feel like language reclamation is such an important part of reconciliation. And I feel like Indigenous sign languages, I personally haven't really noticed that being a focus when it comes to language reclamation.
I mean, I think it's starting, right? There are a few, you know, elders across Canada that still have Indigenous sign language, and so that's how I'm even aware of it. Not a huge population, but there are some. And right now, just thinking about the importance of it and how to recognize, you know, spoken languages, but also sign, and thinking about how the Indigenous sign languages are placed, and in trying to encourage the community to just make sure that those Indigenous sign languages are also reclaimed and also continued alongside the spoken Indigenous languages.
You know, we have to take a quick break, but stay tuned and we'll be right back with Katarina Ziervogel on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. In studio with me is all-around cool girl, Katarina Ziervogel, a writer and actor who lives in Winnipeg. Katarina, I know you're a big fan of the science fiction genre. What's your favorite book or movie?
Probably is actually a show. I kind of watched it growing up, and lots of people love it. It's like, I don't know if you obviously heard of it, Battlestar Galactica. Yeah, so that's my favorite. But I mean, Arcane is also right up there. And I've watched a lot of movies growing up. Treasure Planet is another favorite. So.
I want your thoughts on this. Historically, science fiction has been known to focus mainly on white people's perspectives of the future. In the mid-century, the genre was dominated by white authors and often explored themes like colonizing alien planets. How do you think the perspectives of Indigenous writers can change that narrative and add something new?
I think if you think about the world, like the fact that white Caucasian people have never really been colonized, right? And so just thinking about that civilization and the culture and everything and how the language, how that would be impacted, right? You know, like even thinking as far ahead as 1,000 years from now, right? Also just thinking about travel through space and what that perspective has been so far has been, you know, thinking about how the white person has kind of like created the technology and taken technology from those alien planets. But if you were taking it from a different perspective, you know, thinking about Indigenous writers in the room, I think it would look totally different. I don't think it would be more like colonization. I think it would be more like trade-based. And I think that interaction would be different, more maybe a sharing of resources or even creating a new way to communicate or languages, right? I just think that the mode of it would look totally different. And I would love to see that in sci-fi.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And yeah, when you mentioned communication, like in your science fiction film, Finality of Dusk, it focuses on how two women, an Ojibwe woman and a Nigerian woman, they don't speak the same language and they need to learn how to communicate with each other in order to survive. I also heard that it was your choice to make the antagonist, Odin, a deaf person. How do you think, like what message are you and the co-writer, director Madison Thomas trying to get across?
I think what we really were trying to say was that, you know, it didn't really matter what language you knew or if you spoke a language. There's just a lot of different ways that people can connect with each other, love each other. You know, like we can use those human experiences we have, the love that we all share, to kind of connect. And in the world that we live in right now, there's so many differences in how people are different from each other, and it's really easy to find separation. But what we wanted to focus on is, rather than that, because I mean the two women didn't speak the same language, we were trying to figure out how to create those bonds, how to make those connections and work together, whether or not they shared the same language or not, or, you know, there's ways to understand each other's, and it doesn't always have to be through spoken communication.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Was Finality of Dusk your first big project? How did you get involved?
Ooh. You know, Madison actually contacted me. She was looking for something just to come on as a consultant. The story actually came from her own, brainchild, right? And she wanted my input, just thinking about body language, to consult on that part of the film. And I, kind of put forth the idea that Odin be deaf, and once, I had that idea, she's like, you know what, maybe you should come on as a co-writer and then we could develop the story together. And that's really how I started to get involved, and she kind of drew me into the project.
Oh, that's awesome. We have to step aside for one last time, but stick around because we'll be right back on Here to Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. I'm with deaf and Ojibwe Mohawk writer and actor Katarina Ziervogel. You and your Echo co-star, Alaqua Cox, are bringing much needed representation to the film and television industry as actors who are both deaf and Indigenous. What was it like working with someone who shares those important communities with you?
It was an incredible experience. But honestly, I was so anxious, right? Because I thought I'd be alone when I got there. But everything, once I got to set, was so accessible and everything was kind of ready there for me. And it was already a couple of months after they started filming, but I was amazed at, just how even the folks on set, like the crew, the interpreters, people had learned sign language. The director already had sign language. I was so thankful to Alaqua, because I think without her there, I don't think it would have been as possible the way it was, right? So I was so grateful to have her presence, her experience, and also to share the industry with her, because I don't feel so alone in the industry, right? And the hope is that this will create other opportunities for more deaf, Indigenous actors to be involved in the industry. So I'd love to see that happen.
I think that's a good point too, that you weren't feeling alone, because I think sometimes an issue is tokenization with being Indigenous or deaf. And so did you find that wasn't really an issue with this project then?
No, not at all. I was so relieved, right? Because I was there, and as the mother, and sometimes you feel like you're going to be the only person, eyes all on you, but it wasn't like that. And with Alaqua on set, it felt more like a community, and the story was told through such an amazing way. It's really hard to even find the words to describe it. Like, even 2 years later, after it all happened, I'm still amazed at what an incredible opportunity I'd had to be a part of. But not just one deaf Indigenous actor, but to have two in the same, series is just not something that happens, right? So there was no feeling of tokenism or anything like that. And just knowing the goal of the story and how everything was created from, just the different backgrounds, like with her identity, and just, I felt like it was a natural part of the story, and I felt like it was a part of this world and the way it should have been.
Absolutely. I know I'm looking forward to seeing more stories about deaf and Indigenous people. I heard in an interview that you're Turtle Clan. I am too. Are you a spiritual person? And if so, how does that guide you in the industry?
I think I'm still learning, because I don't know a lot about it still. I'm still on my journey, and I'm trying to reconnect with my culture, and it's challenging because things aren't always accessible. And so I think that I do hope that the discussion is started with the community, in the hopes that the community is willing to see the deaf and hard of hearing members within it, and just be able to show what we do need in order to access our culture. Because I'd like to learn more, and just in order to do that, that will help us guide us and further our journey.
So what's next for you? Is there an actor or director who you hope to work with in the future?
Oh, I would love to work. I would love to work with the creator of Res Dogs. That would be incredible.
Absolutely. Do you have any stories in mind that you hope to tell one day?
I'm actually working on a sci-fi story at the moment, but from the Indigenous perspective.
That's amazing. That's great.
Yeah. I do have a plan. I thought about making it into a graphic novel, but with the hopes that eventually it could be an animated show, potentially. I'm not quite sure. I'm hoping through the process it will lead me to the right place, but I'm feeling very passionate about it, and I love to write, so I'm hoping to do more of it this summer. I've had a lot of shows that I, watched a lot of sci-fi growing up, so that I want to take into account, but also just to see where the process takes me. And I'm hoping that one day I can show that project to the world.
Awesome. Do you have any advice for deaf actors or writers, people trying to be part of the film and television industry?
I think just if you have a dream, whatever that dream may be, or any passion or hunger for something, pursue it. Whether access is in place or not, try to figure out how to make it accessible. Make the dream happen, right? And find the people or create the space that the barriers can be broken down, so that, they know that you also have a right to be in this space, and you're not afraid to kind of fight for the things that you want to achieve.
That's a great message, Katarina, and we appreciate you so much for coming on the show, and just thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. That's all the time we have for the show this week. You can always catch up on any episodes you may have missed by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca, or by visiting our APTN News page on YouTube. This show and past episodes are also available as podcasts. You can find those at aptnnews.ca/face-to-face podcast. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm Sav Jonesa, and we'll see you back here in 7 days.